This is Tall Tale TV, your podcast for sci-fi and fantasy short stories. Black Phasm, written by S. Alessandro Martinez, performed by Chris Herron. No one is about. The coast is clear. Then we go with the 6, Catalusa said to the others. She hoped none of them would be observed leaving her home. It was impossible to ensure no one was lurking about. She couldn't risk her friends being linked to suspicious activities. Friends? Perhaps conspirators was a better description for what they were. An eclectic group of people who had come together from all over the city of Lorona, including a wealthy human couple, merchants by trade, another human woman who ran a bakery several streets away, and a male Cathan who belonged to the city guard. And then there was Catalusa herself, a planar, the daughter of a soap maker who had moved away from home at an early age to use her skills as a seamstress. "Come, people," the Cathan, Madasso, told the others, peering out of the front doorway. He pulled his scaly face back inside, closing the door behind him, and fixed them all with his yellow eyes. "The guard patrol will come down the street soon on the 8th bell. We must be gone by then." The group muttered agreement and hurried out of Catalusa's cramped house, a decrepit pile no different than every other building in this forsaken nation. Except, of course, those structures that belonged to the Church of Repenencia. But even those holy buildings had begun to show signs of decay in the last few decades. The meeting had gone well, Catalusa felt. Each participant had brought a list of people they thought might join their cause, and Catalusa thought there seemed to be a few with high potential. She knew they would need all the help they could get. A revolution could not be accomplished by 5 people alone. As the others dispersed in various directions into the night, Madasso turned to look back at Catalusa, seeming to study her for a moment. "Do you believe he will actually visit you tonight?" he asked. Catalusa hesitated a moment before answering. With a heavy sigh, she said, "To be honest, I'm not even positive he exists." As if to belie her words, a shiver of fearful anticipation coursed through her at the thought of the second meeting she had set up for this night. She reached up to the black horns on her head and fingered the left one's jagged stump. All planar possessed the bony projections atop their skulls, but her left horn had been broken years ago during a particularly brutal absolution. She would never forget the pain. "I believe he is real," Madasso said reassuringly. He took her hand and brought it away from her broken horn. "Stop fretting. He will meet you. There have been so many rumors traveling around these last 3 months. How can I not believe that someone is out there actually doing these things? But whether that person is truly a spirit manifested, as some say, I cannot even guess." She nodded in agreement. And with that, Madasso wrapped his cloak around his broad shoulders and left. Catalusa stood at her house's threshold for a moment, looking out into the murky night. Her faith was important to her, as it was to all those who resided in Arcacontes. Yet, it was because of that faith that she and the others had come together to conspire. The Church of Repenencia was wrong. She knew that in the very core of her being. She had no doubt the Sacred 6 detested seeing what had become of this land over the centuries and how warped its religion had become, to the point that its early practitioners would find it unrecognizable. Despite this, her faith in the 6 themselves remained strong. And this bolstered her belief that the person she was to meet this night was indeed real and could help them. Catalusa quickly went about her small house, extinguishing the oil lamps. Once finished, she put on her traveling cloak before heading out. The meeting was to take place at her father Usto's house, unbeknownst to either him or Catalusa's brother, Terreno, who both resided there. It would have been safer to meet here at her own home, but she desperately needed help with her ill father. Besides, Terreno was out of town on business, and their father unable to leave his bed. Locking the door behind her, Catulusa made her way down the street toward the east side of Lorona where her father's house sat, tucking in among the other decaying shacks, mentally preparing herself to face whomever or whatever she had arranged to meet. For if all went as planned this night, she would come face to face with the black Phasm. A gust of wind brought with it a swift chill, as well as the sound of someone crying in the street below. The wailing pierced the elf's ears like a physical pain. He longed to go down there and offer his help, but knew from experience the person would most likely refuse any aid. "Master Marquestas," said a voice from behind him. Osario Marquestas gazed for a moment longer on the dark city that lay sprawled beneath the high balcony of his home. Dim lights in all the houses like failing beacons, almost swallowed in the oppressive gloom. With a sigh of resignation, the elf turned to look at the man who had called him. It was his head servant, Emmer, a human man whose exposed skin was covered in both old and new scars, as well as many still healing wounds. "Yes, Emma," Osario said. "The rest of the servants and I are finished with the day's work," the man replied, his eyes lowered respectfully. "Good," Osario nodded. "And did everyone pay penance?" It was a question the elf hated to ask, but until things changed, appearances had to be kept up at all times. "Of course," Emmer said. He removed his shirt, which Osario saw was sticky with blood on the backside. Emmer then turned his back toward his master. The man's skin was raw with still seeping wounds. "We flogged ourselves this day in the name of Sister Sansavian of the Six. Much guilty blood was spilled to pay for our transgressions." Years of practice allowed Osario to keep any of the grief he felt at the sight of the man's bloodied flesh from showing on his face. "Excellent," he said. This word, in response to the evidence of Emmer's self-harm, tasted repulsive in Osario's mouth. "You may all leave for the night. I shall see you in the morning." "Very good, Master Marquestas," Emmer said, with a stiff bow that clearly pained him, though he tried to hide it. "May the Six forgive you. And you as well." The man bowed again, another brief grimace of pain visible on his face before he disappeared inside. The elf was once more alone in the lofty balcony of his mansion. How ridiculous! What did he, a single elven man, need with such a grand house when the rest of the citizens of Lorona lived in hovels and dilapidated shacks? His eyes swept the city below him. It was like a sea of rotting, crumbling buildings, the same as every village and city in the nation of Arcocantess. As the years passed, this place more and more resembled ancient ruins instead of a thriving land where people lived, worked, and worshipped. The elf rested his elbows on the balcony's stone railing, the long sleeves of his scarlet robes hitched up, exposing his lean, tanned arms. The specters of countless cuts, burns, beatings, and other forms of torture marred his own flesh. Almost all had been self-inflicted, of course. He shook his head and pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. The people of Arcocantess were all taught at a young age how to inflict pain upon themselves. Several of his own childhood scars were still visible, not just on his arms, but all over his body. Others had been replaced time and time again by new wounds. It was an abhorrent practice that had been indelibly ingrained into his people's culture and psyche for centuries. It had certainly been a fundamental tenet of Osario's life until Palermo, his mentor, had showed him the truth. Palermo's teachings had not been easy to accept, as they brought Osario's core beliefs down around him to lay in ruins. But eventually, Osario accepted the truth. The elf swallowed an uncomfortable lump that had formed in his throat. If only Palermo were still here today. Just then, Osario spied a dozen people far below him, walking along the path from his front door toward the street. Once the servants were gone for the night, he knew he could get to work. Turning away from them, the elf let his gaze drift upward, and he contemplated the dark sky, its millions of stars twinkling like tiny gemstones tossed in an ocean of black. Were the six sisters truly up there watching over all of Arkankantes? It was a question he was taught to never ask, but one that crept into his mind every so often. If the six were there and cared for the people, why had they let the holy nation of Arkankantes devolve into the sorry condition in which it existed today? Did he, Osario Marquestis, truly believe in the six sisters? The answer was undoubtedly yes. No matter how many times his mind questioned the existence of the six sister goddesses, the answer his heart provided was always the same: yes. But is this life what the six wanted for their faithful? Once again, his eyes swept down to the rotten dilapidation of the city before him, like a vast necropolis where the interred corpses still walked about, not knowing they were already dead. In the distance, Llorona's cathedral, still majestic even in its own decrepitude and the darkness of night, loomed over all as it began to toll the 8th bell. The six sisters could not want this. Not a land where the people tortured themselves daily in the hopes of purification through penance. Not a day went by when the sound of wailing did not echo from all corners of every city in the land as the faithful visited the various temples and churches of the six sisters to have their assumed transgressions physically beaten and brutalized out of them, leaving their bodies masses of mangled flesh, all in the name of blessed absolution. The elders and the shepherds of the churches across Arkankantes solemnly tended to the flocks who came to them for atonement during weekly services. The rest of the time, an individual was expected to take up the rod, torch, whip, and razor at home to perform the necessary penance themselves. Each of the six sects of the church was devoted to one of the six sisters, and each had its own preferred method of absolving the guilt of its congregants. Here in Llorona, the whipped hierophants, who honored Sister Sansavian the Scourge, were dominant and were responsible for most of the city's religious affairs. Osario sighed. He supposed whippings and beating were not as atrocious as what the devotees of Sister Murialis the Afflictor or Sister Nolana the Denier did to their charges. The elf shuddered at the mental images that flashed behind his eyes. Damn it all, the elf thought, slamming a fist down on the railing. Change was needed in this land. A desperate, dramatic change. He believed this with all of his soul. This was no way to live. This was no way to maintain a nation. This wasn't what the six wanted of their followers, and he couldn't possibly be the only one in this entire country who could see how wrong everything was. No, he knew he wasn't. The few people he had helped already were more akin to his way of thinking. Otherwise, they would not have risked so much to reach out to him. And after monitoring them for a while before making contact, he was positive they were the sort of people who would not talk freely about what he had done for them. Not that they knew his true identity. Still, it seemed like such a small number of people. It was disheartening. It would be so easy to simply give up, but he knew he couldn't. His position in society allowed him to perform his own penance at home, which meant he could forego the abuse as he had been doing. He could leave the rest of the population to their fate. The majority of people were too deluded by the church, while the rest were too afraid to protest, even in secret. No, he could not sink into those thoughts. Despite the state of ruin the city, and in fact the whole of the nation, had fallen into, Llorona and Arkankantes were his home. They needed him. And with the rumors that were being whispered since he had begun his work 3 months ago, rumors of a dark spirit manifesting at night and stalking the streets to attack the unrepentant, perhaps those who had heard of the Black Phasm would seek out the truth and open their eyes. He stood to his full height. With a fire now burning in his chest, Osario left the balcony and strode inside. It was time for the elf to get to work this night. Catullus walked alone down the quiet street. The holy day of Dominelli Scaba, honoring Sister Dominelli the Flayer, had been a full 2 days ago, and yet the worn cobbles were still sticky with the rivers of penitent blood that had been spilled, as the majority of the town had paraded through the streets in celebration, cutting their own flesh in penance. Her skin prickled, and a shiver ran down her spine at the thought. She was glad she had moved out to live on her own, for if she still lived with her father and brother, Terreno would have made sure she had participated in the gruesome act. A sudden noise came from somewhere ahead of her, though she could not determine its source due to the nightly fog that had rolled in and now shrouded the streets. Catullus made a quick dash for the cover of a nearby alleyway and hid within the shadows. It was not illegal to be out at night, but she knew if she encountered a guard patrol, she would be stopped and interrogated for quite some time. She couldn't be delayed and possibly miss her meeting with the Black Phasm. As the seconds wore on, she eventually saw an elderly dwarf pass by the alley entrance, mumbling prayers to herself. When the woman had disappeared into the mists, Catullus breathed a sigh of relief and went on her way. Half an hour's walk brought her to the edge of the Barina River in the fetid district the locals dubbed Rankburg, where all the slaughterhouses, tanneries, matchstick makers, and other terrible manufacturing industries that made one's nostrils burn were concentrated, surrounded by the homes of their employees. Catullus nearly staggered backward as the reek suddenly hit her. Though she had grown up here, the impact of the stench never lessened. She thanked the six upon safely reaching her father's house and let herself in. The house, actually more of a 2-room shanty, was quite dark. Catullus made her way by memory to a table and lit a tallow candle. From there, she made her way to the tiny bedroom where an elderly plainer man lay prone upon the bed, apparently unconscious and breathing in a laborious manner. In the dim light of the candle, his hair and beard appeared gray, like dirty snow, and his once shining black horns were now faded to dullness with age. Usto, her father. Catullus strode over to the bed and placed her candle upon the bedside table. She looked down at her father, tears welling in her eyes. "You fool," she whispered, leaning down to kiss his cheek. Her father had always been a strong and hale man, despite the devotion with which he had always performed his penance. The previous week, he had taken ill with some sort of sickness that had affected his breathing. He had assumed, as most would have in this damned land, that the illness had been sent from Sister Myrialis of the Six, goddess of affliction. And, as any faithful repenenciato would have done, Usto had traveled to one of the temples devoted to Sister Myrialis in the neighboring town of Domar. The sect of Sister Myrialis was ruled by the plague monks. Catullus shuddered at the thought of these mysterious sorcerers. Usto had visited the monks, hopeful they could use their vile malumancy to help bring his sickness to its full potential and thereby absolve him of the guilt he obviously carried. For why else would the goddess have struck him ill? The plague monks had succeeded in their foul magic, and now Usto lay here in his bed, alternating between unconsciousness and a delirious half-wakefulness, his breathing sounding like an intermittent death rattle. Catullus' chest tightened with fear as she watched her father struggle to take in air. Which of his labored breaths would be his last? She shook her head to dispel the thought. No, she couldn't think that way. The Black Phasm would help. That's what the rumors were beginning to say, right? That he was helping heal people. She wondered if these rumors had reached any of the priests of penance. What would the sovereign bishop of Arcancantes do if he ever found out? She let out a weak chuckle. Fortunately, this town was too small for anyone important to take notice. There was a rap at the door, and Catalusa froze in place, her heart banging against her ribcage. For a brief moment, she thought it must be Torreno, her brother, come home early. But then common sense reminded her that her brother wouldn't knock before entering his own home. The staccato raps continued, and she concentrated on the pattern, a sequence of 3 quick knocks, a pause, then 2 slow ones. It was the code she had been told to expect. Picking up the fluttering candle once more, Catalusa returned to the front entrance. Hands trembling, she opened the door a crack, peering through. A figure stood just beyond, cloaked in shadows. Is it really you?" She hated how her voice shook on the last word.
"The invocation, please,"
the figure whispered urgently.
"Oh, yes, forgive me,"
Catalusa answered. She recalled the words that had been written in the message.
"Night falls, but the 6 still watch. Who calls at this hour?"
"The Black Phasm,"
the figure answered in a harsh whisper, and stepped over the threshold as Catalusa pulled open the door fully to allow him entry. She peered out for less than a second, then shut the door with haste, hoping no prying eyes were out and about on the street to see him enter. When she turned to face him, Catalusa took an involuntary step backward as she examined the figure before her. He was tall but lean, and wore all black, a color outlawed in Arcancantes, for it represented an unrepentant soul. Boots, gloves, trousers, tunic, overcoat, and a head wrap in which she could make out the outline of pointed ears. All were the color of pitch. Every garment seemed to be made of leather and hugged his body. Not an inch of skin was exposed to view. Upon his head sat a wide-brimmed hat, and underneath it, a terrifying countenance peered out at her. She now knew why some rumored him a sinister spirit. She studied his face for a long moment before realizing it was simply a mask. It reminded Catalusa of the Aquila wyverns, a beaked subspecies of small dragons native to Arcancantes. The mask had a beak like the Aquila, long and ending in a sharp point. Brown eyes peered out at her through eyeholes sealed with what appeared to be small round panes of glass. She waited for a moment for her heart to slow before she spoke.
"Are you really the Black Phasm?"
Catalusa asked, her hand absent-mindedly going up to the broken left horn to scratch at its broken stump.
"I am,"
the Phasm answered. His voice was distorted by the beaked mask he wore. It would be impossible to place the voice if she heard it elsewhere unmodified.
"Your message said your father has fallen ill."
Catalusa nodded.
"Yes."
She swallowed a lump in her throat.
"Sending a message to you was quite difficult."
She didn't know why she mentioned this. Once it was out of her mouth, she felt foolish. Of course the man knew how difficult it was to request his aid.
"I apologize for that,"
the Black Phasm said, unbuckling a satchel that Catalusa now realized he was carrying. He appeared to remember something and began going around the tiny room, examining the walls and floors. What was he looking for? Traps she might have set for him? His caution was completely understandable, though Catalusa had to admit it made her feel the tiniest bit insulted. She didn't question him.
"Being difficult to reach is how it must be,"
the Phasm said once he was done looking around.
"For if I were to expose my true identity, or if I were caught, my life would be forfeit. If the priests of Penance knew who I was, they would come to silence me."
"I understand,"
Catalusa replied, her anxiety easing somewhat.
"Come this way."
She led the Black Phasm into the bedroom where her father rested on the bed. Again, the man searched the room as if for hidden traps. When he seemed satisfied there was no danger, Catalusa spoke.
Some sort of infection has taken hold of his lungs, I believe, she told him as they both observed the unconscious man struggle to breathe. He visited the plague monks in Domar. She shook her head, and the words suddenly burst from her. This can't be what the Six want. Instantly, she felt a flush suffuse her as these blasphemous words and exasperation of her father's actions slipped from her mouth. Catullus had never voiced such opinions outside the safety of her group of conspirators, but this masked man, surely he wouldn't be doing what he did if he did not oppose the teachings of the church in some way. Anyone who did so put their life in jeopardy. Catullus stood beside him, motionless, waiting for the man to respond.
I do not believe this is what the Six want either,
the Black Phasm said, his voice low but clear. A weight lifted off Catullus' chest at his response. She watched as the Phasm set his satchel on the floor and leaned over her father, head tilted as he listened to Usto's breathing for a few moments. He lifted the old man's eyelids to study the eyes and put 2 fingers under his jaw to sense the strength of her father's heartbeat.
Before falling unconscious, did your father complain of chest pains?
Yes, when I visited him last evening, Catullus answered.
Much coughing?
Catullus nodded. The Black Phasm then knelt down beside his satchel and proceeded to extract various vials of liquid, sachets of herbs, and a ragged-looking tome, along with a mortar and pestle. Without speaking, the man flipped to a page in the book, skimmed it, then poured the contents of several vials and packets together into the mortar. He began grinding it all with the pestle. "May I ask you a question?" Catullus said, biting her lip nervously and restraining herself from scratching at her broken horn. She had to know more.
You just did,
the Black Phasm answered. He made a noise, but the mask made it difficult to determine whether or not it had been a chuckle.
What is your question?
Catullus hesitated a moment. Why do you do this? Why do you go against the church in order to help people? If you were ever caught,
they would surely send the Order of Deprivation's ordained assassins for my blood, yes,
he replied. He poured a strange red liquid into the mortar. It began to fizzle, and a pungent steam rose from it. Pulling a leather cloth from his bag, the Black Phasm quickly covered the bowl.
This needs to sit for a minute.
Catullus waited, but the man spoke no more. She asked her question again. Why do you risk your life to do this? A sigh emanated from the mask, and he turned the beak visage towards her.
As I said before, I do not think the Six would want us living like this, he said, crossing his arms. Long ago, someone in my life made me realize how warped the teachings and doctrine of the Church of Repenencia had become over the centuries.
He shook his head.
This is not how the Six want people to live. A sort of corruption infected our land long ago. How this came to be, I cannot say. Most alive today are blind to its doings. It is hard to notice something that creeps into everyday lives with slow, sinister deliberation over such a great stretch of time. But you can see it everywhere. If you studied the history texts of Archicontes, you would see the slow change and process of degradation. Of course, all that material is under lock and key at the academy in the capital. No one has been allowed inside the vault since the 4th sovereign bishop of Archicontes forbade it.
Then how did you study these things? Catullus asked. Who was this man? If he had been inside the academy... The Black Phasm waved away her question.
It does not matter.
Catullus felt a slight irritation at his dismissal, but let him continue.
Our land will be nothing but ruins in a few generations,
the Black Phasm went on. His tone of voice seemed to be getting more heated.
The people of our land are so bent on enforcing and achieving penance, and too many end up crippling themselves. That affects everything over time. What happens when the farmers can no longer farm because they've mutilated their legs? The food supply begins to dwindle. What happens when masons and laborers cannot work because they broke the bones in their own hands for absolution? Our buildings and structures decay. What happens when children die in the name of atonement?
His voice had reached a passionate volume, but then calmed as he seemed to remember where he was.
Forgive me.
It is all right, Catulusa said, the man's words still running through her head.
Our land is large, and our population great, the Phasm went on. So it is difficult to observe the ramifications of our traditions. But if you look, really look, you'll see the signs. How many empty houses have you seen in this town? The city of Lorena was built for many more people than what currently reside here. It is the same across Arcantes. I've seen it.
He paused.
Maybe not in our lifetime, but eventually this nation will be devoid of life.
With a sigh, the man in black with the beaked mask turned away to check on his mixture. It seemed ready, for he uncovered the whole thing and brought the bowl under Usto's nose so that the vapors could be inhaled by the unconscious man. Everything this mysterious Phasm had just said raced around inside Catulusa's head. This man was of the same mind as she. He wanted to fight against the twisted ways of this land just as she did. In fact, he was already fighting as the Black Phasm, a mysterious healer going around the city, treating those who had crippled themselves in the name of the Six Sisters. 8 years ago, my mother died, Catulusa said as she watched the Black Phasm work. She went to visit Elder Materno for penance, and he... Her voice caught in her throat as the memory came flooding back. He whipped her so badly. She wiped at her moist eyes and cleared her throat. Ever since then, I've been opposed to the sickening ways we are expected to honor the Six. It's not right. She stepped toward the man. Listen, I belong to a group of people...
No,
the Black Phasm interrupted her.
Do not speak more of that. I do not want to hear it.
He finished his ministrations and emptied the contents of the mortar into the chamber pot beneath Usto's bed.
The less you say, the better.
But we are like you, Catulusa protested. My group wants to bring change here. Perhaps my friends and I can help you. Do you know what we've managed to learn from other nations? How people live?
I said no.
The Black Phasm returned his used equipment to his bag.
I do not want to involve others in what I do. I am already risking my own life. I cannot be responsible for the lives of others.
What utter rot! Catulusa said, anger brewing in her chest. You're sneaking around at night, healing people in mortal need of aid. How is that not making yourself responsible for the lives of others?
You know what I mean,
the masked man said with irritation. After packing everything, he pulled out a small pouch filled with what looked like seeds or pebbles.
Your father should regain lucidity tomorrow by noon. Make sure he eats one of these capsules with each meal until they are gone.
Yes, but... Catulusa hurried after him as the Black Phasm strode out of the room, headed for the front door.
I must be gone,
he said, reaching for the door handle.
I have another meeting to see to tonight.
Catulusa was about to protest once again when the Black Phasm opened the door. Standing before them at the threshold, his hand reaching for the handle on the other side, was Toreno. Her brother had come home earlier from his trip than anticipated. Osario could feel the heat rush to his pointed elven ears as he took a step backward at the sight of the large planar in the doorstep. The heavily muscled man stood 7 feet, his black horns giving him another foot or so.
"What is this?" Tirreno said, stepping into the house. "Who are you?"
His eyes then flickered over to Catulusa.
"Sister, what are you doing here?"
"Tirreno, you were supposed to return tomorrow morning," Catulusa said in a low voice. "Someone had to watch over Father."
"The Six watch over him," Tirreno said. "If he had died, then that is how the Six would have wanted it."
He took another step forward. Osario felt his heart hammering. This man was the plainer woman's brother. He had seen him around town on occasion. The elf knew Tirreno was not of the same mind as his sister. This was not good. He had to get out of here quickly, but the look on Tirreno's face told him the planar was not going to let that happen.
"Wait, I know of you,"
Tirreno said, glaring back at Osario. A slow grimace of recognition dawned on his face.
"Black-clad, beaked face, you are that black Phasm rumors are spoken of. You're real, and you're here in my house." "I am just leaving,"
Osario said, trying to keep his voice calm. It was difficult.
"No," Tirreno said flatly. "No, I don't think you are. The city guard want any and all information on you, and here you are, in my own home."
He spat on the ground.
"You are an unholy blasphemer, skulking in the night, bringing sin wherever you tread."
"What you've heard is untrue,"
Osario explained, though the elf already knew this man would not listen. Without warning, the planar lunged, tackling Osario to the ground. The breath in Osario's lungs was forced out as he hit the floor, and a loud groan was forced from him. His vision swam for a moment, for the back of his head had struck the corner of a table. But as soon as his eyes could focus again, he saw a fist coming straight for him. The mask, while good for filtering out airborne particles that could cause disease, was no protection against the planar man's assault. The blow caught Osario in the left side of his face, and he immediately tasted blood in his mouth. "Get off him!" the elf heard Catulusa shriek, sounding as though she were far away. He felt Tirreno's weight lift off him, and he heard scuffling. The punch had shattered the mask's glass eyepieces. He couldn't see. The elf knew he had no choice, and removed his mask. He saw Tirreno, eyes full of rage, holding a struggling Catulusa by her one unbroken horn, her feet barely touching the ground.
"You dare bring this unholy thing into our father's house!" Tirreno bellowed.
He lifted Catulusa by the horn completely off the floor and delivered several rapid punches into her stomach. He then tossed his sister into the wall like a doll made of rags.
"Enough!"
Osario shouted, tasting copper as he spoke. He removed a hidden knife from his belt and held it before him. Tirreno laughed at the sight, but his expression soon became one of confusion and disbelief as he stared at Osario, who now stood before him unmasked. Catulusa also looked up at the same moment from where she was sprawled on the floor, marveling at the elf's bare face.
"It cannot be,"
Tirreno said, utter shock having replaced his rage.
Elder Osario Marquestis."
"Silence," Osario said, mustering all the authority he could. He imagined himself speaking to one of his own congregants.
"Elder Osario,"
Tirreno whispered, his face still radiating disbelief.
"How could you? Have you forsaken your position in the church? Your duty?"
Osario shook his head, glaring at his opponent.
"My duty is to aid the people, is it not? That is what I am doing. I am repairing the harm the Church of Repenencia has been doing for far too long."
"But this is sacrilege,"
Tirreno said, a note of childish incredulity in his voice.
"I said silence,"
Osario ordered. He kept the point of his knife aimed at the planar. What was he to do? This man would surely reveal the Black Phasm's identity to the authorities. but he couldn't just stand here forever, keeping Toreno at bay. Carrying the knife was as far as he'd gotten in planning for an emergency situation. Damn his own stupidity.
"Are you going to kill me?"
Toreno asked, anger returning to his words. Osario didn't know how to answer. His duty was to help people. The purpose of the Black Phasm was to save lives, not hasten their end.
"You can't do it,"
Toreno sneered. He stepped forward and, like a snake, struck out, grabbing Osario's wrist in his large hand and wrenching the knife from his grip so that it clattered onto the floor. The planar kicked the weapon out of reach. "Let me go," Osario said, struggling to free his wrist. It was futile. The planar was too strong. Toreno spat on the floor.
"Even with your faith misplaced in this unholy act you perform, you still don't have the fortitude to—"
There was a dull flash of metal, and the man's words were cut off, replaced with a wet gurgle. Toreno released Osario's wrist, and his hands went up to his throat, trying to stem the flow of blood that had begun to escape his flesh. Toreno collapsed, his life essence pooling on the floor, forming a dark puddle. Behind him stood Catalusa, Osario's knife grasped in her shaking hand, dripping with the life it had just taken. The weapon fell from her grip as Catalusa and Osario watched her brother twitch and writhe on the ground until he lay motionless. The elf looked up from the dead man to his sister. "I had to," she said, her voice trembling. The elf could see the planar woman was struggling to keep her face expressionless, despite the tears flowing freely from her eyes. "Catalusa," Osario whispered, unsure of what to say. Catalusa wiped away her tears, only for fresh ones to stream down her cheeks. "He would have killed us. I couldn't let—" Regaining some sense, Osario walked around the body over to Catalusa and put a hand on her shoulder. Thank you." He looked down. "I would not have wished for you to perform such a deed." "What is done, she whispered, and with a deep breath seemed to find some composure. She swallowed loudly. "He was my blood, yes, but he was also a brute. You didn't know him, other than as one of your congregants, but he—" She paused. "Blood means nothing if there is no love in the relationship." She tore her eyes away from the body on the floor to look at the elf. "Plus, what is one life for the many that you have and will continue to save?"
"I am very much in your debt."
Osario swallowed. He was struck by how calm the planar was when he himself felt like collapsing, though she was most likely experiencing some shock.
"We should dispose of of your brother's remains."
"There is an opening to the sewer at the end of the street," Catalusa replied, her tone harsh. "We can put him in there. It's where he belongs."
"That should work,"
Osario said. He looked over at the doorway to the bedroom. He was glad the old planar had not been conscious to see what had just transpired. He wondered how Catalusa would explain Toreno's disappearance to their father. "Thank you for everything you've done," Catalusa said after a moment of silence. "Listen, I shall never tell anyone of your true identity, but you cannot keep doing all this work alone. You need allies. You need friends." She looked in his eyes. "Know that you can trust me. I offer my help to you in whatever capacity I can lend aid. You wish to bring change to the nation? You will not even bring change to all of this one city if you go at it all alone. Accept me. Meet my people. We will work together. You need all the assistance you can get."
"But if you are caught,"
Osario began. "I know what will happen." Catalusa waved his words away. Her look was one of utter determination. "Do not think me naive." Osario studied the woman's stern face, her broken horn, her skin marred by a lifetime of scars, blood, her brother's and her own, staining her clothes. There was a fire in her large eyes, and a steeliness in her countenance that told of the hardships she had lived with. She was right, he knew. He couldn't possibly keep doing this whole operation himself, especially if he was to bring about the changes this nation required. Osario stuck out his hand. "Cautelusa, I accept your pledge of aid." The planar woman took the elf's hand in a firm hold, then pulled him into an unexpected hug. Cautelusa whispered into Osario Marquestis's pointed ears, her words like blue steel. "Black Phasm, hear my vow. Together we shall change lives and bring about the downfall of the madness that grips our land. I swear it." Alessandro Martinez is a horror and fantasy writer living in Southern California. His writings have appeared in several magazines and anthologies. He enjoys writing about all sorts of horror, especially about unspeakable creatures, body horror, and supernatural terrors. He also enjoys writing high fantasy. He has a fantasy world all his own with many mystical and terrible creatures, fantastic races, and powerful magic. Hey guys, I have been looking forward to this story for quite some time. Alessandro Martinez has a talent for shining light on the darker side of fantasy, the gritty, dirty reality of life in an unjust and uncaring world, regardless of what magics may flourish. I have 2 other stories on the channel by Mr. Martinez, and if you haven't heard them before, they are well worth the listen. I'll go ahead and leave a link down in the description to where you can hear them. But before you go, be sure to subscribe. This show is available on YouTube, Facebook, and just about every podcast app available. I'm Chris Herron, and that's it for today's Tall Tale TV.